They locked me in the cellar of my own house on the night the Alpha King came to choose his Luna. And the cruelest part was not the dark or the cold or the missing. My one chance at the ceremony. The cruelest part was that the cellar was the only room in the whole great house that still smelled like home. Let me explain that because it's the heart of everything, and you have to understand it the way I lived it. My name is Briar, and the house they locked me in was mine. Not the servants' quarters I slept in, not the kitchens I scrubbed, the whole house. Greythorn Hall, the principal seat of the district, had belonged to my father, who had been its lord and the alpha of our line, and it should have passed to me, his only child, when he died. That was the law, and that was his will, and that was the shape my life was supposed to take. But my father took a second wife when I was 12, Lady Verena, a beautiful, cold, capable widow with 2 daughters of her own. And when my father died 3 years later, suddenly of a wasting fever, Lady Verena did not grieve him so much as she moved. Within a season, she had taken control of Greythorn, the holding the lands, the income, all of it, running it, as her own positioning. Her daughters, Odile and Cressa, as the ladies of the house, and reducing me, the rightful heir, the daughter of the hall, to a servant within my own walls. I scrubbed the floors I'd been born to inherit. I served meals at the table where my father used to seat me at his right hand. I answered, "Yes, my lady," to a woman wearing my mother's jewels, and no one stopped it because Verena was clever and well-connected and the district was far from the king's eye, and a 15-year-old orphan with no allies cannot fight a grown woman who holds all the documents and all the power and all the keys. There was a will, my father's true will, naming me his heir, witnessed and sealed. I knew it existed because he'd shown it to me before he died. Pressed my hand on it, told me Greythorn was mine and that I should never let anyone tell me otherwise. But after he died, the will vanished. Verena's first act, I'm certain, was to find and destroy every copy she could lay hands on, because a will naming me heir was the one thing that could unmake her whole theft. She searched for it for years, in fact increasingly frantic, because she knew it was somewhere and she'd never found the original, and a stolen house is never truly safe while the proof of the theft might surface. I want to be honest about how the theft actually happened, because people imagine it must have been some dramatic single moment, and it wasn't. It was slow and quiet and legal-looking the way the worst thefts are. Verena didn't seize Greythorn with a sword. She seized it with patience and paperwork and the simple fact that I was 15 and grieving and had no one. She told the district my father had named her steward of the holding until I came of age and proved myself fit, a fiction, but who was going to contradict a composed grown widow on behalf of a stunned orphan girl. She moved her daughters into the best rooms. She let my own status erode by degrees. First, I was the daughter of the house in mourning, then the girl who helped about the place, then simply a servant, each step small enough that no single one of them was a scandal. Until one day I woke up and realized I'd been scrubbing floors for a year, and no one in the district even remembered I was supposed to be the heir. That's how you steal a life from a child, not all at once, but one unremarkable morning at a time, until the theft is just the way things are, and fighting it would seem like the madness, not the crime. She never found it, because she didn't know what I knew. That before he died, my father had hidden the original will and his signet ring with it in the one place he trusted behind a loose stone in the wall of the old wine-cellar, the deep, cool cellar beneath the hall where he'd stored his best vintages, a room Verena never used, and her daughters thought beneath them. He'd shown me the loose stone. If you ever need it. Briar, he'd said, it's here. Your name, your house, your father's seal. Right here where they'll never think to look. And for 8 years I had left it there untouched because I was a powerless servant, and the will was worthless without the power to enforce it, and a girl who produced a will against Lady Verena would simply be called a forger and a thief and worse and disappear. So I waited. I didn't know for what. I just kept the secret and scrubbed the floors and held on. And the cellar, the very room that held my father's will and his ring, and the proof of everything stolen from me was because Verena never went there, the one place in Greythorn that still smelled of my real family. My father's stored wine, my mother's old preserves on the far shelves, dusty and forgotten, the cool stone smell of the childhood corner where I used to hide from my nurse, where my father would find me and pretend every time that he couldn't, calling my name through the dark while I held my breath and grinned. When the great house above had been made entirely Verena's, her perfume, her daughters, her furniture, her rules, the cellar stayed mine, a held breath of the life that was taken from me. I used to go down there when the work was done and the house was asleep, just to sit in the dark and breathe the smell of who I used to be, the daughter of a man who'd loved me before grief, and a stepmother turned me into furniture. It was the only place in the world I was still Briar. Everywhere else, I was the servant. So when the Alpha King's choosing came, you can see why the cellar mattered. King Roderick of the Highlands was making a progress through his territory to choose his Luna, visiting each district in turn, holding a great presentation and feast at the principal hall of each, so that the eligible daughters of every house could be presented to him, and the moon, they said, might show him his fated mate among them. And the principal hall of our district was Greythorn, my house. So the Alpha King was coming here to the very hall that should have been mine to choose his Luna from among the women of the district, and Lady Verena was beside herself with the opportunity, polishing Odile and Cressa, certain that hosting the king's choosing was her family's path to the highest possible match. But there was a problem, and the problem was me. Because King Roderick I learned from the kitchen talk, had known my father, had respected him, they'd ridden together years ago in some campaign, and Lady Verena was terrified in a way she couldn't quite admit even to herself of what might happen if the king under Greythorn's roof laid eyes on the dispossessed daughter of his old friend, scrubbing the floors of her own stolen house. Awkward questions, old loyalties, the wrong kind of attention on an inheritance she'd rather no one examined. And there was something else, too. Something in the way she looked at me, sometimes a wariness deeper than the practical, as though she sensed I was dangerous to her in a way she couldn't name. So Verena made the safest choice she could. She made sure the king would never see me at all. On the morning of the ceremony, she had me locked in the cellar. "You'll stay down here out of the way until the king is gone," she said through the door in the cool, reasonable voice she used for cruelty. "We can't have a servant underfoot during a royal visit. And mind you, stay quiet." The bolt slid home. Her footsteps went away, and I was left in the dark with my father's hidden will and the smell of my lost childhood, and the muffled sound beginning far above me of the most important ceremony in the kingdom, the choosing of a Luna happening in the hall that should have been mine while the rightful heir sat locked in the cellar like something to be ashamed of. I did not weep. I had stopped weeping years ago. I sat in the dark, my back against the cool stone, and I listened to the music begin above me, and I thought, this is the shape of my life. Everything that's mine taken. Everything I'm owed given to someone else. And me locked away in the dark, told to stay quiet, while the world I belong to happens somewhere I'm not allowed to be. I did not know, could not have known that the one thing Verena had not counted on was already climbing the steps of Greythorn Hall. That the king who could undo every bit of the theft was about to walk in under my roof, and that no locked door in the world can keep a wolf from the scent of his fated mate. I tracked the ceremony by its sounds the way a prisoner tracks the world by what leaks through the walls. I heard the great doors open and the hall fill the murmur of the district's gathered families, the rustle of the finest gowns Greythorn had seen in years. I heard the herald and then a silence, and then the particular hush that means a king has entered a room. I heard the music change to something formal and grand, and I heard threaded through all of it Lady Verena's voice at its most gracious and most false, playing the perfect hostess in my mother's hall, presenting her household to the Alpha King. I could not make out words, only tones, but I knew the shape of what was happening. the daughters of the district being presented one by one, Odile and Cressa among them, in their costly gowns, each girl hoping the moon would stir in the king when she curtsied each family, praying for the match that would lift them. And I sat in the cellar below it all, and I let myself, just once, imagine the other life, the one where the will had held, where Greythorn was mine, where I was not the servant in the dark, but a daughter of the hall presented to the king under my own roof with my father's name behind me. I let myself imagine it for exactly as long as it took to hurt, and then I put it away, because imagining a stolen life is a way of being robbed twice. What I did not know, what I pieced together later from those who were in the hall, was that the ceremony above me was going badly, in a way that had nothing to do with me yet. King Roderick was not enjoying his own choosing. I learned this later from him. He had been at it for weeks, district after district, hall after hall, a parade of presented daughters in their finest, each curtsy and each hopeful upturned face, blurring into the next, and not one of them in all that progress had stirred the bond. He had begun to believe privately that the moon had no mate for him at all, that he would have to choose a Luna by cold judgment, rather than by the pull the songs promised, and the prospect had made him weary to his bones. So when he came to Greythorn, the hall of an old comrade he'd respected and been saddened to lose, he came going through the motions, gracious and remote, letting Lady Verena present her daughters and her district, expecting nothing, feeling nothing, a king, performing a duty he'd stopped hoping would mean anything. He told me later that he had actually thought of my father that evening, had walked into Greythorn's hall and felt the old grief remembering the man he'd ridden with, and had wondered idly what had become of his friend's family, whether there had been children. He'd meant to ask, and Lady Verena, gliding forward to greet him as the lady of the hall, had given him a smooth answer about having taken in her late husband's affairs, and the moment had passed, and the king had let it pass, because he was tired, and the presentation was beginning, and one does not interrogate a grieving widow at a feast. So he came within a single question of finding me hours before the bond did, whether there'd been children, and the question died on his tongue, and his fated mate stayed locked in the cellar, and the choosing went on. I think about that often. How close and how nearly missed, how much of my life turned on a scent, finding a crack in the floor that a question asked aloud would have made unnecessary. And then somewhere in the middle of it, somewhere between one curtsy and the next, in the crowded, perfumed hall, he caught a scent on the air that he could not place and could not ignore. It was faint. It came up, I suppose, through the old bones of the house, through a floor grate, a stairwell, the gaps that breathed between a cellar and the hall above it. Faint and almost lost under the perfume and the crowd and the smoke of 100 candles. But it cut through all of it the way one true note cuts through Namaez, and it reached something in the Alpha King that had been silent and weary for weeks, and that thing came suddenly, violently awake. He stopped mid-sentence, I'm told, went still, lifted his head, his nostrils flaring, his cold composure cracking into a sharp animal attention that startled the whole hall. Lady Verena, presenting Odile, faltered. The king was no longer listening. The king was scenting the air like a wolf who was caught after a long and hopeless hunt, the one trail he'd stopped believing existed. He asked, "I'm told a single sharp question of the room whose scent is that?" And the hall fell into confused murmuring because no one else could smell what a fated king could smell. And the gathered daughters glanced at one another, each hoping it was hers, and Lady Verena's smooth hostess mask slipped for just an instant into something closer to fear, because she alone in that hall had reason to suspect what the king was smelling and where it was coming from. And then before she could redirect him, before anyone could turn the moment into a presentation of one of the eligible girls, the king moved. I knew none of this below. I only knew that the music above me stuttered, and the murmur of the hall changed its texture, a ripple of confusion running through it, and I sat up in the dark wondering what had happened with no idea at all that what had happened was me. that 8 years of being locked away and made invisible were about to end, because the one thing no stepmother's bolt can hold is a fated bond, and mine had just reached up through the floor of my own stolen house and seized the king by the heart. He was already moving. By the time I noticed anything was wrong, the Alpha King of the Highlands had abandoned the ceremony, abandoned the presented daughters, abandoned every rule of how a royal choosing is supposed to go, and was following a scent he didn't understand out of the hall and into the house, toward me in the dark behind a locked door. The first I knew of it was the sound of footsteps, where no footsteps should be coming down toward the cellar, fast and certain, with Lady Verena's voice trailing behind them, high and frantic, in a way I had never once heard from her. "Your Majesty, please, there's nothing down there, only storerooms, the cellars. It's no place for. Your Majesty, I really must insist, there's nothing of interest. Only a servant we keep her below during—" "Open it." A man's voice, deep, rough, absolutely, without question. A voice I had never heard and felt somehow in my chest. "This door, open it, now." "Your Majesty, I don't have the key is—" "You have until I count to 3, my lady, and then I take it off its hinges." I was on my feet. My heart was slamming. I did not understand what was happening, why a man whose voice did things to my chest was standing on the other side of the cellar door, demanding it open, why Verena was babbling, why the whole shape of the night had cracked. And then I heard the bolt thrown. Verena's hands, I think, shaking, because the alternative was the king tearing the door apart, and the cellar door swung open and torchlight spilled down the steps, and a man came down them. He was tall and dark and powerful, with a presence that filled the small stone room the instant he entered it. And his gray eyes found me standing there in the torchlight in my servant's rags, and the bond hit us both like the world breaking open. I had never believed it would happen to me. I was a dispossessed servant in a cellar. The fated bond was a thing for daughters of halls, for women with names and futures, not for the girl scrubbing the floors. It took me anyway, the way it takes you, in the songs a wrenching deep in my chest, my wolf surging up out of 8 years of beaten-down silence to scream a single word, mate, at the king standing in my prison. And I watched it hit him, in the same instant watched King Roderick of the Highlands, who had hunted for this scent through weeks of hopeless choosing, go rigid as it slammed into him at full strength, his weary remoteness burning away into something raw and stunned and certain. For a moment, neither of us could speak at all. I stood in my rags in the torchlight, a scrubber of floors, and the most powerful man in the kingdom stared at me, as though I were the only thing in the world. And the 8 years of being made invisible, and the bond roaring up between us, and the sheer impossible wrongness of being found here like this in the dark, it was all too much, and I simply stared back, my heart slamming against my ribs. "There you are," he breathed. The same words I'd learned that fate seems to put in the mouths of men who finally find the thing they'd stopped believing in. "I caught your scent through the floor of that hall, and I thought I'd lost my mind. I've been looking for you for weeks, through every district in my territory, every hall, every presented daughter, every curtsy, and not one of them, not one, and I'd stopped believing the moon had anyone for me at all. And you were here, the whole time, under this roof." His eyes swept me. The rags, the dark, the bolt on the door, and his face began to change from wonder into something dangerous. Locked in a cellar, in servants' clothes, while they presented other women in the hall above. His voice dropped very low and very cold. "Why are you locked in a cellar?" Behind him, at the top of the steps, Lady Verena had gone the color of ash. "She's a servant, Your Majesty," she said, fast, too fast, her gracious hostess voice cracking at the edges. "A simple servant. We keep her below during important occasions. She's not right. She's not fit to be seen. She's simple. She's my mate," the Alpha King said without turning around, his eyes never leaving mine. The words dropped into the stone cellar and silenced. Everything silenced Verena's. Babbling silenced the house. Silenced 8 years. The moon's own, I have searched my whole territory for the woman who carries this scent, and I have found her at last, locked in the dark of a wine cellar in servants' rags, while you presented your daughters in the hall above." He turned then, slowly, to look at Verena, and there was a king's cold fury rising in him, now the kind of fury that does not shout. "So, I am going to ask you again, my lady, and you are going to tell me the truth, because I am very good at knowing when I'm lied to, and you have lied to me 3 times since I came down these stairs. Who is she, and why in a house holding a royal choosing under a roof?" I came to in memory of an old friend, was the king's own fated mate locked in a cellar so that I would never see her. And there it was, the whole of my stolen life cracked open at last by a king who had followed my scent through a locked door into the one room in Greythorn that still smelled like home. 8 years of being made invisible, of being told to stay quiet in the dark, ended in a single moment because the one force in all the world that no bolt and no stepmother and no theft could hold had reached down through the floor and brought the king to my door. I should have wept with relief. Part of me soared. But a deeper, older part of me, the part that had spent 8 years watching powerful people decide my entire life without me, looked at the king claiming me in the torchlight and at Verena cornered, and felt underneath the joy a cold and unexpected thing. Here is another powerful person deciding what I am in a room I didn't choose to be in. And I understood, even in that first shining moment, that being claimed by a king was not the same as being free, and that I had a great deal to say now that someone was finally going to have to listen. What I did next surprised everyone in that cellar, including the king and most of all me, because I did not run into his arms, and I did not fall at his feet, and I did not let myself simply be lifted out of the dark like a rescued thing. I stood my ground and I spoke. "Before anyone decides what I am," I said, and my voice came out steadier than it had any right to 8 years of swallowed words finding their way out all at once. "I'll tell you myself, because I am done having powerful people decide it for me." I looked at the king. "My name is Briar. I am the daughter of the lord of this hall, the man you knew, the man you rode with. Greythorn was my father's, and by his will and by law, it is mine. This woman," I pointed at Verena and my hand did not shake, "is my stepmother. When my father died, she seized his house, his lands, and his name, and she made his heir into a servant, and she has run my inheritance as her own for 8 years, while I scrubbed the floors I was born to own. She locked me in this cellar tonight, not because I'm not fit to be seen, but because she was terrified that if you, who knew my father, laid eyes on his dispossessed daughter under his own stolen roof, you'd start asking exactly the questions you're asking now." Verena's mouth opened. "Lies. Your Majesty, the girl is deranged. She's a servant with delusions. There is no will. There was never any—" "There is a will," I said, "and here is the moment. I had waited 8 years for the moment I finally had the power to use the secret I'd kept. My father's true will naming me his heir witnessed and sealed. You searched for it for 8 years, didn't you? Verena frantic, tearing the house apart because you knew it existed and you could never find the original. You never found it." I almost laughed at the terrible, perfect irony of it, because he hid it in the one room you never set foot in. The one room you thought was beneath you. The one room you locked me in tonight. I crossed the cellar to the far wall, to the loose stone my father had shown me as a child, untouched for 8 years, and my hands were trembling now, not with fear, but with the enormity of what I was about to do, because for 8 years that stone had been a secret I was too powerless to use, and now finally in front of a king with the law itself standing on the steps, I was going to use it. I found the edge of the stone with my fingertips the way I had as a child, when my father guided my small hand to it, and I worked it free. It came loose with a soft grind of stone on stone that was the loudest sound I'd ever heard, and I reached into the cold, dark hollow behind it, and my fingers closed on the oilcloth bundle that had waited there since before my father died. I drew it out, unwrapped it there in the torchlight with everyone watching. his signet ring, the wolf of our line, worn smooth on its face, and his will, sealed with that same wolf intact, the wax unbroken, the words inside as true as the day he'd written them, Greythorn and all its holdings to my daughter Briar, my sole and rightful heir. You locked the dispossessed heir, taunt, I said, turning, holding up the proof of everything she'd stolen, my father's seal catching the torchlight, in the exact room where the proof of your theft was hidden. For 8 years you hunted this. And tonight, to keep me out of the king's sight, you handed me the one thing I needed by locking me in the one room I needed to be in. You stole my whole life, Verena, and in the end, you delivered it back to me yourself. The cellar was utterly silent. The king's eyes went from the will in my hand to Verena's stricken face, and the last of his doubt, if he'd had any, burned away. But here's the thing I need you to understand, the wall that rose in me, even in that moment of triumph, because it is the truest thing about me, and it nearly cost me everything good. The king turned to me, the bond blazing in his eyes, and he said, warm, certain, a king setting a wrong to rights. Then it's done. Briar, daughter of my old friend, my fated mate, the rightful heir of this hall. You'll come with me. I'll restore your name. I'll see this woman answer for her theft, and I'll make you my Luna as the moon intends. Let me take you out of this dark and give you the life that was stolen from you. He held out his hand. Come. And I looked at his outstretched hand, the hand of a good man offering me everything, and I did not take it. Because of the wall. Because of 8 years. With respect, your majesty, I said, and my voice shook now not with fear but with the effort of saying a thing I'd never been allowed to say. You're doing it too. He went still. Doing what? Deciding my life, I said. For me, in a room I didn't choose to be in. The words poured out all the swallowed years. Do you understand what my whole life has been? People with power deciding what happens to me. My stepmother decided I'd be a servant. She decided I'd be locked in this cellar. For 8 years, every single thing about my life has been decided for me by someone stronger than I was, and I have had no voice, no say, no choice in any of it. I didn't choose to lose my father. I didn't choose to lose my home. I didn't choose to become a servant in my own house, or to be told to stay quiet, or to be locked in the dark tonight. Every door in my life has been opened and shut by someone else's hand. And now you, a king, the strongest person who's ever stood in this room, have walked in and decided in the space of 5 minutes that you'll restore me and claim me and lift me out and make me your Luna, and you hold out your hand and say, come, as though my whole life is once again a thing that powerful people arrange while I'm told where to stand. I was crying now, but my voice held. And I can't, Roderick. I can't just take the hand and be lifted, however good the hand is, however much the bond pulls, because I would be doing the same thing I've done for 8 years, trading one powerful person who decides my life for another. A kinder cage is still a cage, if I never once got to choose to be in it. Do you see I don't want to be rescued? I have never in my entire life gotten to decide a single thing for myself. And before I am anyone's Luna, before I am anyone's anything, I need just once to be the one who chooses. Not the rescued girl, not the claimed mate. Me, choosing. For the first time in my life. I had never said anything like it to anyone. For 8 years, I had said, yes, my lady, and as you wish, and swallowed every word that mattered, and now they all came out at once in a cellar to a king, and I half expected the sky to fall. Because here is what they don't tell you about being powerless for a long time. The worst of it isn't the work or the cold or even the injustice. The worst of it is what it does to your sense that you're a person, someone whose wants count, whose voice means something, who gets a say in her own existence. 8 years of being decided for had taught me in my bones that my preferences were irrelevant, that the question, what does Briar want, simply never came up in any room ever. And I had survived it by going quiet, by wanting nothing out loud, by becoming exactly the silent, useful furniture they'd made of me. So when the most powerful man alive held out his hand and prepared to decide my future for me, kindly, lovingly, But for me, every instinct I'd built to survive 8 years screamed that I was about to disappear again, lifted from one set of powerful hands into another. My own wants as irrelevant in a palace as they'd been in a cellar. The cellar was silent, Verena forgotten, and the Alpha King of the Highlands looked at the dispossessed heir who had just refused his outstretched hand, and I braced for anger for a king's affront at being refused for the rescue to curdle. It didn't. Something moved across his face instead, understanding, and then a kind of fierce respect, and then something that looked almost like shame at himself. And what he did next is the reason I love him. He lowered his hand. "You're right," King Roderick said quietly. "Moon help me, you're right, and I'm a fool, and I almost did to you the exact thing I came down here furious to find done." He looked at the will in my hand, at the rags I wore at the cellar that had been my prison, and my last scrap of home, both. "You've spent 8 years having your life seized by people stronger than you, and I walked in, and in the name of love and justice started seizing it too, deciding, arranging lifting you out without ever once asking what you wanted. The bond made me feel I had the right. I don't. No one does. That's the whole of what was done to you, and I won't be one more person who does it." He took a step back, gave me space in that small stone room, the most powerful person in it, deliberately making himself smaller. So let me do this properly. Not as a king claiming a mate, as a man asking a woman who is finally free to answer however she likes. And then the Alpha King set everything right in the only way that could ever have reached me, by giving me first, before anything else, my own life back. He turned to the cellar door and he called for his guards and his stewards, and there in the torch-lit dark, he set the law in motion, my father's will, witnessed and sealed and produced before the king himself was declared valid. Lady Verena's 8-year theft of Greythorn was exposed and ended. The holding the lands, the name, all of it restored to Briar, to me its rightful heir, by royal authority that very night. Verena's protests collapsed against the will and the signet and the king's cold certainty. She had stolen a house, but you cannot argue a sealed will out of existence. Once a king has held it in his hands, and her stolen world came down around her in the space of an hour. I watched it happen from the bottom of the cellar steps, and I will not pretend it wasn't the strangest hour of my life to stand in my prison and watch the architecture of 8 years of injustice simply dismantled by the production of a single document I'd been sitting on a wall away from the whole time. Verena tried everything. She wept. She'd never wept in front of me in her life. She accused me of forgery, of seduction, of bewitching the king. She invoked her years of stewardship, her daughter's prospects, the disruption to the district. And none of it touched the sealed will and the signet ring, because the truth, once it's finally allowed into the room, has a weight that no amount of practiced lying can lift. I almost felt something watching her. Not pity, I didn't have that much grace in me yet, but a kind of grim awe at how completely a theft unravels the instant the proof surfaces. How the thing she'd spent 8 years and endless frantic searching trying to bury had been waiting all along in the one room she was too proud to enter. She and her daughters were put out of the hall they'd usurped. Not cruelly, the king was just, but completely. And the dispossessed servant who'd been locked in the cellar walked up the cellar steps for the first time in 8 years as the Lady of Greythorn Hall. My house, my name, my father's seal on my own hand, mine restored before I'd agreed to be anything to anyone. Walking up those steps undid something in me. I had gone down them that morning, a servant locked in the dark, told to stay quiet. I came up them, a free woman and the lady of my own hall, into rooms I hadn't been allowed to walk through as anything but a scrubber of their floors in 8 years, and the household, the servants I'd worked beside the district folk, still lingering. All of them watching the girl they'd half forgotten was ever the heir, ascend into her own restored name. I touched the doorframe of the great hall as I passed it, the way you touch something to be sure it's real. My father's house. I was home and I was Briar, and no one in that hall would ever again call me anything else. And only when it was done, only when I stood in my own restored hall, a free woman and heir owing him nothing, did the king ask me his question. "Briar," he said. We stood in the great hall, now my hall. The ceremony long forgotten, the gathered families departed, just the two of us under the roof that was finally truly mine again. I followed your scent through a locked door tonight because the moon named you mine, and I won't pretend the bond isn't real because it is, and I feel it pulling at me every second I stand here. But I've given you back your house, your name, your standing, your freedom, and I've done it with no strings because it was yours stolen from you. And restoring it is simple justice, not a courtship. You owe me nothing for it. Nothing. If I'd found any dispossessed heir locked in a cellar with a valid will in her hand, I'd have done exactly the same, mate or no mate, because it's the law and it's right. So don't mistake the justice for a claim on you. You are, as of tonight, exactly what you said you needed to be free. The lady of your own hall, mistress of your own life, able to choose anything in the world. He stood very still, the powerful man holding himself in check, leaving the whole of it in my hands. So I'm asking, and the answer is entirely yours, and I will honor it whatever it is. Not come with me, not be my Luna, just this. The moon made us mates. I would spend my life grateful to have found you. But you have never once gotten to choose your own life, and I will not be the one who takes that from you, even now, even loving you, even with the bond screaming at me to reach out and never let go. He drew a breath, and I saw what it cost him to say the next part. So, choose. Stay here, the Lady of Greythorn, free of me forever, and I'll defend your house and your name from a distance for the rest of my days, and never trouble you again, and I'll mean it, Briar. I won't come back to wear you down. Or choose me. Not because I claimed you, not because the bond demands it, not because you were rescued, but because you, free and restored and owing no one anything, decide that you want the man who followed your scent through the door. Your choice. The first fully free one of your life. Take all the time you need, a night, a season, a year. There's no hand held out this time, and there's no clock. Just the question, and your own free will to answer it whenever and however you wish. And the wall, the 8-year wall, the everyone decides my life. But me, wall came down for good, because he had done the one thing that could bring it down. He had given me back the power to choose completely before he asked me to choose him. I stood in my own hall holding my father's signet ring, a free woman for the first time in 8 years, and I understood the size of what he'd just done. He could have claimed me. He had every excuse to bond his power, my gratitude, the simple momentum of rescue, the fact that 9 women out of 10 in my place would have wept with joy and run straight into a king's arms. Instead, he had restored me, set me free, made me his equal, and then stepped back physically, stepped back, put distance between us, made himself smaller in my hall, and handed me the choice, knowing I might walk away telling me he'd honor it if I did. Because he understood this king, who could have had anything that a love I hadn't freely chosen, would be to a woman like me just one more thing decided for her, one more door opened and shut by a stronger hand. He had heard me. In a cellar, in my rags, refusing him, he had actually heard me and changed everything to meet it. No one had heard me in 8 years. He'd heard me in 5 minutes. So I chose. And because I had finally gotten to be the one who decides I could choose with my whole heart and know it was mine, I crossed the hall to him on my own 2 feet of my own free will. The Lady of Greythorn walking to a king because she wanted to, and I did not take his hand because there was no hand held out. I took his face in both of mine the way you take hold of something you've decided to keep, and I said, "You followed my scent through a locked door, and then you unlocked every other door in my life, including the one to my own freedom, and stepped back so I could walk out of all of them myself." My voice broke. Do you know how long I've waited for someone to give me a choice instead of a command? My whole life, Roderick. And the first real choice I've ever been handed, I'm using it on you. Not because the bond pulls, though it does. And not because you rescued me, because you didn't. You did something far better. You freed me. And a free woman choosing for the first time in her life, choosing with her own, restored hands. Chooses the man who understood that freeing her mattered more than keeping her. I held his gray eyes. Yes, I'll be your Luna. I choose it. Freely. Mine to give, and I'm giving it to you. The Alpha King of the Highlands made a sound that was half a laugh and half something raw, and he pulled me in, and this time I went, because I'd chosen to, and he kissed me in my own restored hall, under my father's roof, the Lady of Greythorn and the king, who'd followed her scent through a locked door, and there was nothing rescued or claimed or decided for about it. It was chosen. Wholly, freely mine. We were wed in the spring at Greythorn, my hall restored and full of light, the cellar that had been my prison, now just a cellar again, my father's wine and my mother's preserves brought up at last to be shared instead of forgotten. Lady Verena and her daughters were gone answering elsewhere for what they'd taken. I'll admit, I did not grieve them, though Roderick, being more just than I was, saw they were not left destitute, only stripped of what was never theirs. And I ruled my own holding now as its rightful lady, and before long as the Highlands Luna, both and I governed it the way I wished someone had governed my fate when I was a powerless girl in a cellar, by giving people, wherever I could, the dignity of a choice instead of a command. Roderick says it's the thing he loves most about how I rule. He says a Luna who knows in her bones what it is to have her whole life decided for her, rules a people with a mercy no one born to power ever learns. He says I learned it in a cellar. I suppose I did. They locked me in the cellar of my own house on the night the Alpha King came to choose. His Luna locked away the dispossessed heir, so the king would never see her. Hid me in the dark with the ghosts of my stolen family and the proof of everything taken from me, and presented their daughters in the hall above. And the Alpha King followed my scent through the door. No bolt could hold it. No stepmother's scheme, no theft, no 8 years of being made invisible. None of it could stop a fated bond from reaching down through the floor of my own stolen house and bringing the king to my door. But it was not the bond that saved me in the end, and it was not the king's rescue. It was that the king, having found me locked in the dark, did not simply lift me into a brighter cage. He unlocked every door, gave me back my own life and my own name and my own free will, and then stepped back and let the girl who'd never once chosen anything choose at last for herself. I chose him. I will choose him every day for the rest of my life, and every single time it will be mine, freely given by a woman who was finally, after 8 years in the dark, allowed to decide. People hear our story and they think the miracle is the bond, the scent through the floor, the king who came to a cellar door and would not be turned away. And it's true that the bond found me where nothing else could, that no bolt could hold it. That fate reached down through the bones of a stolen house and would not let me stay lost. But I know which part was the real miracle, and it wasn't the finding. Anyone can find a girl. The miracle was a king who, having found her locked in the dark, did not simply move her to a finer room, who heard a servant in rags tell him no, not like this, and listened, and gave her back her whole self before he asked for any part of it. The bond brought him to my door, but it was the choice he handed me standing in my own restored hall that made me his. And I would not trade that choice, the first free one of my life, for every crown in the world. It is the thing I'm proudest of, that when I was finally free to want anything, I looked at the man who'd set me free, and I wanted him.